The Secret Lives of Rome's Boy Concubines, Slaves of Pleasure in the Emperor's Court. You can taste copper in your mouth from where they hit you. The marble floor beneath your bare feet is colder than anything you've ever known, polished to a mirror shine that reflects a version of yourself you no longer recognize. Somewhere beyond these painted walls, your mother is grinding grain, unaware that 3 days ago her son was torn from the hillside where he chased goats under a sky that seemed to stretch forever. That boy is gone now. In his place stands inventory, golden-haired Celtic stock, appraised at premium value, waiting to learn what Romans mean when they whisper the word delicatus. Before we descend into this forgotten world, I'm genuinely curious. Where in the world are you right now as you listen to this? It astounds me that we can reach across centuries and continents to explore these hidden truths together, connected by nothing but curiosity about the lives history tried to erase. The year is 87 CE, during the reign of Emperor Domitian, and across the marble-veined heart of Rome, a trade flourishes that official histories will never quite name. In the Porticus Octavia and the private atriums of senatorial villas, a specialized market operates with the precision of any other Roman institution, except its merchandise consists of children selected for beauty that wealthy men can own, shape, and consume. These weren't the agricultural slaves bent over grain fields or the gladiators dying for entertainment. These were the delicati, the exploitation, the concubini, boys purchased specifically for the erotic aesthetics of powerful men, their youth weaponized into a commodity more valuable than silver. The boy we'll call Cais, though that name will be taken from him, came from a Celtic settlement in what is now southern Gaul. The mancipes, the slave traders, moved through frontier territories like seasonal storms, and they had developed an expertise in recognizing marketable beauty. Roman tastes ran specific. Pre-adolescent boys with delicate features, fair coloring, bodies that could be maintained in a state of frozen youth through careful diet and medical intervention. Celtic and Germanic children brought premium prices. Their golden hair and pale skin satisfied an aesthetic fetish that wealthy Romans discussed as casually as they debated wine vintages. The examination process stripped away any remaining illusion of humanity. In the specialized slave markets near the theater of Pompey, dealers who focused exclusively on delicati ran operations that combined brothel aesthetics with auction house efficiency. Cais was bathed in rose-scented water, his hair trimmed and oiled until it caught lamplight like spun gold, his skin rubbed with preparations that made it luminously soft. The white tunic they dressed him in was designed for a single purpose, to emphasize youth and vulnerability, triggering the specific desires these markets existed to satisfy. Marcus Laelius Strabo, the man who would purchase him, represented a common type among Rome's elite. A 43-year-old equestrian who had made his fortune in Syrian trade, he owned properties in Rome and Baiae, collected Greek sculpture, and maintained what his peers called a refined household, a euphemism for a villa staffed with beautiful boys trained to ornament his private life. When Strabo circled Cais in the market, his assessment was methodical. He tested the boy's teeth, examined his bone structure, ran practiced hands along his arms and shoulders. The dealer's pitch emphasized trainability, age appropriateness, and aesthetic longevity. How many years of beauty could be extracted before the boy aged into uselessness? Celtic stock ages well if managed properly, the dealer explained, his voice carrying the casual authority of expertise. With the right diet, the right medical attention, you can maintain the aesthetic for perhaps 5, maybe 6 years before replacement becomes necessary. The transaction cost Strabo 3,000 denarii, roughly what a legionary soldier earned in 7 years. The price reflected not just rarity, but the extensive training these boys would undergo. They weren't purchased for manual labor. They were acquired as living objets d'art, their purpose defined entirely by their owner's desires and the social currency that beautiful possessions provided among Rome's elite. The villa that became Kai's world operated as a kind of prison disguised as paradise. Marble floors inlaid with hunting scenes from Greek mythology, walls painted with murals of Apollo and Ganymede, that loaded mythological reference to Zeus's beautiful cupbearer, abducted to Olympus to serve the gods. Every aesthetic detail reinforced the same message. Beauty exists to be taken, possessed, and consumed by those with power to claim it. His education began under Alexandros, a Greek in his 30s who had himself been a delicatus 15 years earlier and had survived by becoming indispensable in managing his master's collection. Alexandros wasn't cruel, but his kindness carried the emotional distance of someone who had learned that attachment to boys with expiration dates led only to grief. The curriculum he designed was comprehensive and psychologically devastating. Mornings, Latin and Greek language instruction, but not the kind that produced scholars. Kais learned the vocabulary of submission, how to address senators, how to deflect questions without seeming evasive, how to express opinions that flattered his master's intelligence without challenging it. He memorized vast passages of poetry, not for their beauty, but because he might be called upon to recite them during intimate moments, his voice a kind of aesthetic accessory to his master's pleasure. Afternoons, cultural refinement. He studied the myths depicted on the villa's walls so he could discuss them without seeming too educated. He learned to play the cithara, a stringed instrument, discovering that music offered brief moments of escape, until he realized that every song he learned was chosen for its potential to enhance his master's erotic experiences. Evenings, physical conditioning, though not toward strength. Every intervention aimed at preserving pre-adolescent softness, forestalling the masculine development that would end his usefulness. His diet was controlled with pharmaceutical precision, restricted calories to prevent muscle growth, herbal supplements that physicians specializing in delicati claimed could delay puberty. Oils were massaged into his skin. Cosmetics were applied to maintain the luminous coloring that had justified his purchase price. But the psychological conditioning cut deeper than any physical training. Slowly, systematically, Alexandros and the household staff dismantled Kai's sense of independent identity. His birth name was forbidden. He was now Ganymede, that mythological reference that made his exploitation sound like divine selection rather than systematic abuse. His memories of home were dismissed as peasant fantasies, irrelevant to his true purpose. Most devastatingly, he was taught that his value as a human being existed only in his master's satisfaction. Success meant beauty, youth, and perfect submission. Failure meant worthlessness. The other boys in the household represented various stages of this same process. Alexis, a Syrian boy with calculating dark eyes, had learned to navigate the system through strategic manipulation. He cultivated usefulness beyond beauty, making himself valuable for his ability to manage household affairs and read their master's shifting moods. Dionysios, a Greek boy in his 3rd year, had taken a different path. Complete psychological surrender. He moved through the villa like a beautifully dressed ghost, responsive to commands but showing no spark of individual consciousness. The other boys whispered that Dionysios represented what happened when someone stopped resisting entirely. Still functional, still valuable but no longer quite human. Kai's first private summons arrived 3 weeks after his purchase. Alexandros spent the entire day preparing him, selecting the perfect tunic, arranging his hair to catch lamplight, applying cosmetics so subtle they enhanced his youth without obvious artificiality. The coaching focused on reading their master's unspoken needs. You exist for his pleasure. Your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, these are irrelevant. What matters is providing what he needs before he has to ask. That night passed in a haze of compliance that Kais would spend years trying to process. Strabo wasn't violent. In fact, his gentleness made the exploitation more psychologically complex. He praised Kais' intelligence when the boy recited Greek philosophy, stroked his hair while reading, offered small intimacies that mimicked affection while reinforcing absolute ownership. The worst part wasn't physical pain, but the growing confusion about what was happening. When Strabo expressed satisfaction, Kais felt proud, and then immediately disgusted by his own pride, caught in a psychological trap designed to make victims complicit in their exploitation. Months collapsed into years, marked not by seasons but by the arrival and disappearance of other boys. Kais watched the entire cycle repeat. Fresh arrivals paralyzed by terror, gradual adaptation to captivity, desperate maneuvering for position and favor, and finally the inevitable disposal when youth faded beyond concealment. Some boys were sold to other households. Others were manumitted with modest pensions. A few simply vanished without explanation, and the remaining boys learned not to ask where they had gone. The household dynamics created bonds that were simultaneously genuine and poisoned by competition. Boys shared survival strategies, warned each other about their masters' changing moods, provided comfort during inevitable moments of despair. But they also competed for favor, knowing that being the preferred delicatus meant better treatment and greater security. Friendships formed in the shadow of mutual exploitation, real affection mixed with the knowledge that any of them might be sacrificed to preserve the other's positions. Kais developed complex survival mechanisms. He performed his role with skill but tried to preserve some inner core of self that remained untouched by his circumstances. It proved harder than he imagined. The system was designed to make resistance not just difficult, but incomprehensible. When every aspect of existence depends on pleasing your master, when your sense of worth has been rebuilt around his approval, independent thought becomes alien. He caught himself feeling genuine affection for Strabo, and then hating himself for that affection, trapped in an emotional labyrinth with no exit. The most insidious aspect was how thoroughly he internalized his captor's values. He became proud of his ability to anticipate Strabo's desires, competitive with other boys for the privilege of serving, skilled at reading social dynamics in ways that would have been unimaginable to the child chasing goats on a Celtic hillside. The training didn't just control his body, it colonized his imagination, making alternatives to captivity literally unthinkable. Physical changes brought existential terror. His voice began deepening, requiring careful breath control to disguise. Muscle development appeared despite dietary restrictions, demanding increasingly drastic interventions. Facial hair required daily removal. Each change represented approaching obsolescence, and Kais watched older boys disappear with the knowledge that his own disposal was inevitable. The end, when it arrived, came with the same bureaucratic efficiency that had marked his beginning. Strabo's tastes had shifted toward younger acquisitions, and Kais's approaching physical maturity made him unsuitable for the role he'd filled. Alexandros delivered the news with professional detachment. Manumission would be arranged, along with a modest inheritance and recommendations for employment in an administrative position. The skills acquired through years of exploitation, language proficiency, cultural education, instinctive deference to authority, made him valuable for legitimate work. The irony was brutal. His abuse had equipped him with qualifications that opened doors in Roman society, but each opportunity reminded him of how he'd acquired these skills. His perfect manners made him an ideal subordinate, but these traits had been conditioned through systematic psychological manipulation. Freedom felt less like liberation than displacement. After years of structured existence, independent choice proved overwhelming. He'd been trained to anticipate others' desires so thoroughly that identifying his own wants became nearly impossible. Walking away from the villa for the last time, Kais carried more than the skills that would define his future. He carried scars that would never fully heal, the psychological imprints of a system designed to transform children into decorative objects for wealthy men's pleasure. His story joined thousands of similar narratives that Rome's historians chose not to record, voices silenced by a civilization that preferred celebrating its architectural achievements over confronting its moral failures. The archaeological record preserves fragments of these lives in uncomfortable ways. Pompeii's preserved villas contain rooms clearly designed for the housing and display of delicati. Legal texts discuss their ownership with the same casual precision applied to livestock. Literary works reference them as unremarkable aspects of elite life. Martial's epigrams joke about the expense of maintaining beautiful slaves. Petronius's Satyricon depicts their role in status competition. Seneca condemns the practice while acknowledging its normalization among his peers. What's remarkable isn't that Rome institutionalized such exploitation. Slavery's brutality took countless forms, but how thoroughly the system naturalized it through aesthetic language. By framing the purchase and sexual use of children as refined taste, as appreciation for beauty, as participation in a cultural tradition stretching back to Greek antiquity, Roman elite society created psychological distance from the violence at its core. The boys became objets d'art rather than victims, their suffering abstracted into questions of style and preference. The marble halls have crumbled now. The golden doors have oxidized to nothing. The empire that normalized such exploitation collapsed into dust 14 centuries ago. But in the spaces between what official histories celebrate and what they omit, these forgotten lives persist as reminders of costs that civilizations prefer not to calculate. Every monument to Roman achievement was built on foundations that included children like Caius, their youth commodified, their bodies controlled, their humanity reduced to whatever value their masters assigned. In remembering them now, we honor more than their suffering. We acknowledge our responsibility to recognize similar patterns wherever they emerge, how power exploits vulnerability, how systems naturalize violence through aesthetic or institutional language, how those with resources find endless ways to justify consuming those without protection. The faces change, the methods evolve, but the fundamental dynamic persists. Beauty and youth transformed into commodities for those who possess the power to purchase them. Their secret lives were never truly secret. They were simply invisible to those who preferred not to see. Written into legal codes, depicted in artwork, discussed in literature, and then carefully omitted from the stories civilizations tell about themselves. In bringing them back into visibility, in speaking their names, though history never recorded them, we ensure that the price of marble halls and golden doors is never again forgotten. The boy on the hillside, the youth in the painted chamber, the man walking through the villa gates for the last time, all the same person, all part of one unbroken thread of human dignity that even the most sophisticated systems of exploitation could never completely destroy.